Artlist.io.
And this is Colin. How are we doing? Well, I want to talk about the art of telling a story. I've worked on that all my life because I come from a culture where telling stories is not a big thing, it's actually everything. And it's an old skill, really. Human beings are said to be 5 million years old, so I guess for millions of years we've sat around a fire when we discovered what fire was and got warm and amused ourselves by telling stories. And I come from a culture in Australia where telling a story is very important. You get hired for your ability to tell a story most of the time, because somebody's, first of all, might want to know your credentials, but first of all, you'd have to have them on side with you so that they'd want to view your credentials. So somewhere in there is a story. You can be the richest person in the room because you've just parked a Lamborghini out in your driveway and you live in a $10 million house, and that could make you the richest person in the room. However, you could also be the most interesting person in the room, and you wouldn't need a Lamborghini or a $5 million house. You just have to be interesting. And how do you be interesting? Telling stories. In my culture, when I was a kid living in the bush, we sat around a campfire and told stories. And if you were good at telling stories, that meant you didn't have to get up and go and find the wood or do some other chore that was required at the camp. Your job became telling the stories. And in Australia at the time, the pub culture was very big, imported from England, of course, where pubs are still today a big part of the culture. In Australia, drinking in pubs was essential to life. If you could tell stories in pubs, you didn't buy drinks. People brought drinks for you. So telling stories has always had a great value. Which brings me to the point of actually telling stories. There's a technique to everything, and there's a technique to telling a story too. A story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you always must set the stage for a story. You can't just say, well, it was a dark and stormy night. Well, how dark was it and how stormy was it? Okay, let's get down to details here. Because within every good story, the details are ever present. I remember when I first came to America and I got a job talked myself into a job as a reporter on the Miami Herald. And I was there I'd sailed a boat from a 34-foot boat from Africa, and so I'm at the Herald and trying to look important and look like I knew what I was doing, which wasn't too bad, but I hadn't convinced anybody I could actually do anything. And so the news editor said to me, Colin, he said, Burt Reynolds has just checked into the Fontainebleau Hotel over there at the point, so you can go over and get an interview with him. So I said, all right, okay, I'll go to the Fontainebleau Hotel and interview Burt Reynolds. And then, so I called up the public relations person at the hotel, and they said, oh, George Burns is here too. I said, oh, yeah, well, I'll interview him too. So I called Burt Reynolds to get to his room, I get to a phone through to his room, and he says, "Yeah, I can see you at 12." I says, "Great." And then I called George Burns, and he says, "Well, I'm leaving this afternoon, but I could see you at 12." So I thought to myself, well, I got Burt Reynolds, who has just become very famous by taking off all his clothes for Cosmopolitan magazine, and that was going to be the subject of my interview with him. Why did he take off all his clothes? And and there's George Burns, of course, and George Burns was just like an amazing comedian, an amazing personality. So I just thought, well, I can't. I'll have to pass up one of them. No, but why should I do that? I thought, well, I got 2 tape recorders, so I'll rush over there with a couple of tape recorders. So I did. I go to the Fontainebleau Hotel, and at the time I had my son Christian had just been born, and his mother had a little bit of problems with postpartum syndrome, I guess they called it, and she wasn't too handy with caring for him in the early stages, although she became a great mother after that. So I carried Christian with me every place I went in a wicker basket. So I go to the Fontainebleau Hotel, drive over there, and in a fastback Valiant that somebody had given me because it had no reverse gear. So I got Christian in the back in a wicker basket. I pull up at the Fontainebleau Hotel, told the bellhop, I said, can I leave the car parked here? I got a kid in the back there in a wicker basket. And he looks at it and he says, I don't know if that should stay here. I says, yeah, just look after him. I said, I'm just going up to do an interview. I'll be with Burt Reynolds for a bit. So he said, okay. So I leave Christian in the wicker basket. So off I go up to Burt Reynolds is on the 7th floor. I announced myself, come into my tape recorder, and he said, oh, yeah, well, how do you do? And I said, yeah, I'm from the Miami Herald, and let's talk about why you took off all your clothes for Cosmopolitan magazine. He said, well, why not? You know, I got to get laid too. So great, okay. So I put down the tape recorder, and he started talking about how it came about that he did this layout. And I said, Bert, if you just hold 1 minute for me, I said, I'll just be 5 minutes. I've got a kid in the car. I just want to go and check and see how my kid's going in the car. He looked a bit surprised, and he says, okay. So I said, here, I'll leave my tape recorder here. Why don't you just keep talking, okay? You know, all that stuff. I want to know about your dates and all that, and what you think about women, and how come the women are going crazy for you and all that stuff. You know what I mean. You've been asked these questions a million times before, so you can just rattle them on, okay? I said, okay. So I left the tape recorder, then I went down to George Burns on the 5th floor. And George Burns looks at his watch and he says, you're late. I says, yeah, well, I'm sorry. I've got a kid in the car. Okay. Got a kid in the car. All right. Well, okay. I said, it's okay. The bellhops are watching him. Everything's cool. He says, so I go in and start talking to George Burns. And we got how his career started and how he met Gracie and all of that stuff. And I says, yeah, well, this is great. After about 10 minutes, I says, George, would you mind? I said, I just got to go and check on my kid in the car, okay? He says, yeah. It looks a bit oddly. He says, yeah, okay. I said, here's the tape recorder. Just keep talking about Gracie and all that stuff and how you got into Broadway and your career. Okay. You've asked these questions 1,000 times already, so just rattle on, okay? I'll be back in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So I go up to see Burt Reynolds, and sure enough, there's Burt sitting talking to the tape recorder. And I said, how's it going, Burt? He says, yeah, great. I said, I said, what are you talking about all the dates you get and all that now that you take your clothes off and the women can see what you really look like under all that? He said, well, I don't know about that. He says, that's a bit risque, isn't it? I says, yeah, well, just rattle on. I says, what do you look for in women? And I asked him, tried to get him on the subject of sex and women, because that's what this interview is going to be about. So he moved into that fairly easily, as Bert would. He's just a wonderful, wonderful guy. So I had a good time with him. So 15 minutes later, I said, Bert, I got a kid in the car. I'll be back in a minute. just give me 15 minutes. I'll go and check my kid in the car. He says, you got a kid in the car? He says, yeah. I said, but it's okay. Bellhop's looking after him. My son's Christian. He's about, I don't know, a year old, I guess, by now. And so I go down to see George Burns, and George Burns rattling on. Very good. Check my tape recorder, it's still running. And I said, oh, that's good. I says, where are we at now? Have you come to Hollywood yet? No. He says, but I'm getting there. I says, okay, well, let's move to Hollywood, okay? I want to know a bit about that. So he rattled on about that a bit. And I said, oh, George, I'm sorry. I just want to check on my kid again. He looks at me and he says, okay, all right. He said, we should have made this another time. I says, no, we're doing fine. I says, my tape recorder's, it's got a better brain than I have. It's just running around there. Don't worry. I said, talking to the tape recorder. Great. So I had, go back up to Burt Reynolds, and Burt's still talking. I thought, oh, wow, this is good. So I stayed with him about another 15 minutes, dashed down to see George Burns again. And George Burns is getting a bit ticked off with this, and he says, look, he says, could we make this another time? I said, I don't know. I says, you're talking about good stuff here, so let's move on here. So I ingratiated him a little bit, and he started talking again. So anyhow, wound up that interview, raced up to Bert, finished up his interview, got the 2 tape recorders, rush out the car, drive back to the Miami Herald and transcribe the tapes. And the interview with Burt Reynolds, which he ended by saying, he says, this is the strangest interview I've ever had in my life. You haven't been here. And I says, well, these are stupid old questions you've been asked 1,000 times. Why should I be here? So he said, okay. He sort of went with that. But it turns out that what he put on the tape was better than any interview he'd ever given before. It was just fantastic. So I wrote what would become a definitive Burt Reynolds interview. And actually the same with George Burns too. So that was my story about how to interview 2 very famous people without actually interviewing them. But I want to talk a bit more about the art of storytelling. So, telling a story, first of all, you've got to impart a lot of yourself. And I think of my brain, what there is of it, I think of it as a huge tape recorder. Everything that you ever have experienced in your life is stored in your brain somewhere. Every thing you've seen, every vision you've had, every movement you've made, it's all in your brain somewhere. Only it's not called, if it's not called up, it's like folders in a filing cabinet that are not reached for years and years and years. And one day you're looking for it. You're looking under Z, you're looking under V, and there it is, right there. And you haven't opened that file in 10 years, but there it is, still there, the information that you needed. And that's how it is with your brain. If you start thinking of something, a person, that's filed under that name and that experience. It's there. You just got to reach it. So a good way to remember stories is to just attach them to a name. I got many stories about just about everybody I've ever met, and I'm thinking right now it's an editor called Len Cozzi. And that's another thing about telling a story. Let's have names and dates and places. Len Cozzi, 1960, in the early 1960s, 61, Miami Herald. I'd just been deported from Fiji for behaviour unbecoming of a British citizen. So there you go. So I get a job on the Sydney Sun with Len Cozzi, who had to be the roughest, hardest, toughest editor in the entire world. He's worthy of a movie, Len Cozzi was. he just always scratching his balls, and he'd look at a new girl who had come in to be a cadet reporter, and he'd say, "Hey, show me your tits, love. Come on, show me your tits. Come on, you can do that." As he's stuffing a meat pie down his face. That was normal behaviour. If he did that today, he'd be in jail for sure. And he just abused everybody, and was really yelled at people across the newsroom. "You idiot! You absolute fool! Get out of here!" So he thought I was an idiot too. And he told me many times. He says, "Colin, you have a major problem. You're an idiot. You'll never be a reporter as far as if you lived 1,000 years, you couldn't still be a reporter." He says, "Because you're stupid. That's why. Stupid." So I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I've read all the great writers, and I'm getting published in national magazines, so somebody must think I know how to write." He says, "Yeah, well, I don't," he says, and he's standing there scratching his balls and stuffing a meat pie in his face, and just rough as guts. But he was a good guy, basically a good guy, because he did hire me after I won the beer drinking competition, of course. He had to prove something to Len Cosy. But back to telling stories. Just mention a name, and if I think of a name, I can wrap a story around it. I'm thinking of a guy called Fernley. I used to ride when I was a kid, rode horses with Fernley, and he didn't like the way I rode, because he said I rode like a banshee, to use his word. And he says, "You got no style at all," and he says, you just don't regard the horse with any feeling or that. You just drive that horse." And he says, "That's a very sensitive creature. You should show more sense to it." And so we're galloping along, chasing some cattle, some feral cattle out in the bush where I'm from. And old Fernley said, "Well, there's that lead bull over there. We want to go and cut him out and stick him up in the yard and whack his balls off and his horns off, and then we'll get the mob. Okay?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "We're going to run him up. There's a yard up there about half a mile. We're going to run him into that old yard." And I said, "Yeah, well, okay." So I take off this bull, and he says, No, he says, "We're going to go together." Well, I said, "No, I can get that bull." So I ran after the bull, and he went down a ravine, and I went down after him, and bad move. Horse crashed. Bad wreck. Bull runs away. And I see Fernley up there rolling a cigarette. He was a tough old guy. And I said, "Hey, Fernley, my horse is down. I think it's got a broken leg." And he says he's rolling his cigarette, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "I can see that," he yells out. He says, "Well, yes, look at that. It's broken its leg." He says, "I told you not to run down there, and you didn't listen to me." I said, "Well, yeah. And what'll I do now?" And he lights up his cigarette, and he says, "Cut its throat." He says, "It's not going anywhere." I said, "Oh, I've never done that." And he says, "Well, you're going to do it now." So, and he takes a long pull on his cigarette, looks down at me, and he says, "And one other thing. Before you cut its throat, take his head in your hand, put it in your lap, stroke his forehead, and apologize to the horse for being such a stupid idiot. It was a good horse. All your fault. Go to it." Well, I did it, and that was a very traumatic experience, and I've been galloped down thousands of hills since then. But I've never galloped down one of them where I didn't think of that horse and how really thoughtless I was, and how I actually caused his death because I asked him to do something that was really stupid. He could have done it without me, I'm sure, but me on him puts his balance off a bit. Me riding not well put him off some more. So it was basically my fault. But the point of that story is that with every mistake you make in life, fail at some place and don't repeat that mistake. Like I say, I've galloped down 1,000 hills since then, maybe 2,000. But every time I do it now, I look at the ground. Is this going to be good for this horse? Is the horse going to be able to handle it? I feel the horse. I ride as one with the horse. So I learned something from that. And that's a story. That's the point of every story. You should learn something from it. And if you're just merely entertaining somebody with a story, well, that's its own point of the story. But stories are multiple things. Every story relates to every other story. You tell one story, and it becomes something else. I'm looking at a picture of my dear wife Linda on the wall up there, and she's been dead now for 6 years, and she was the love of my life, and I sat by her bed for 4 years while she died very slowly of dementia. Get any disease you like, but don't get dementia. I tell you, it's a terrible thing. Where you have your body and you don't have your brain. You don't have your mind. You're just there, a living, breathing something. But I remember Linda once. I said I was having an argument with her about some stupid thing, and I said to her, we'd moved into a big house and up in Malibu, and I'm making a ton of money, and things are going very well. And I said, well, I'm going to go out riding my horse. She says, good. So I left the house and saddled my horse called Tower, big monster horse, 17 hands, 1 steeplechases on that horse. He was fantastic. So I rode Tower up to the front step of the big house, and I said to Linda, I said, I could see her moving around the kitchen. I yelled out at her, Linda, bring me a glass of port. I need a good smack of port. I'm going to go for a thunder through the hills. The rain's coming, and I want to feel the rain on my face. So she came to the door and she says, "Get your own glass of wine. I'm not your servant. You're an absolute jerk. That's all I can say about you." And I says, "Okay, we'll get my own wine." So Tower's a 17-hand horse, as I told you. So I walked him into the kitchen, which was actually on the ground floor. Walked him up a couple of steps, walked him into the kitchen, and Linda was horrified. Her eyes rolled, and she was about to scream. And I says, "Honey, I wouldn't scream if I were you. If this horse goes ballistic, we got 1,500 pounds here, and he'll go through that door or through that window, and it'll be a wreck in this kitchen. Believe me, it'll be like nothing you've ever seen. It'll look like a bomb hit it." So I sat on Tower, and I reached down and opened the refrigerator, reached in and found a bottle of wine, pulled the cork off with my teeth, took a big slug of it, and she was standing there horrified, absolutely horrified. So I rode the horse out, ducking, had to duck very carefully, get down to the side of the horse, rolled off like one of those Indians, rolled off to the side and managed to squeeze under the arch of the door and got outside, and then she threw a pineapple at me. And Tower red, but I managed to stay on, and I said, "That wasn't very nice. I could have hurt myself." She says, "Next time I see you, I'm going to really hurt you." Well, the point of that story is women are always right. But we all know that, don't we? Anyway, everybody knows that. Women are always right. So, anyhow, but we had a great life, and I loved her dearly. And I remember when I first met her, I said, and we had a good time. We hadn't become intimate yet, but I felt it was coming on, so to speak. And so I'm getting her to warm up to me, and which I did, and we got together, and that was very wonderful. And she said to me one day, we're out in a big field in Malibu, and had another house down there at the time, and she looks at me and she says, "You know, we should probably get together more seriously." She said, "I quite like you." And I said, well, that's nice. You do. Okay. All right. And I said, but I have to be frank about this. She says, yeah, what do you want to be frank about? I said, well, I could never be monogamous. She looked at me quite surprised. She said, well, why not? She said, wouldn't I be good enough for you? I said, yeah, but I said, I said, I'm like that bull in the paddock. I look around and I see all the heifers and I want them all. I don't just want one of them. Why should I have one? I want them all. She said, but wouldn't I be good enough? And I said, yes, you'd be good enough, but, it's a male thing, I guess. We all need something new. Not that you don't want something you're familiar with, so to speak. And so she thought about that for a while, and she said, well, does that mean that you're going to have other women as well as me? I says, yes. Well, would you have one other? I said, no. If I could have 10, that'd be good. I said, I just would like to, that's what we're going to do. I said, now, if you don't think it's a good idea, well, we can think about that. And she says, well, I'll tell you what. She says, if you can have girlfriends, can I have boyfriends? And I said, you most certainly can. I said, there's not going to be any double standards here. I says, what's good for me is going to be good for you. Well, we had the best marriage of any marriage I know. We were together we didn't get married right away. We got married 10 years later when I was now making so much money. My attorney told me, he says, Colin, he says, you've got to either get married or do something. He says, this is getting a bit complicated. I says, yeah, well, okay, I'll get married. So I did a prenuptial and did that, and so it was very wonderful. But I did have other girlfriends, although not a lot of them. Maybe 2 or 3 others beside being married, and she had a couple of boyfriends, and so we'd all get together at the dinner table or whatever, and we'd go to parties together, and it'd be always an interesting situation. This is my wife Linda, and this is my girlfriend Joni, and this is my other girlfriend Margaret, and she'd introduce then a couple of her boyfriends, and this is my regular boyfriend Mike, and these are my other 2 friends, Harry and James, and so it'd go on like that. And so we became easily the most interesting couple in the room. Now, we were not the richest couple in the room ever, but we were certainly the most interesting. We got invited everywhere. People wanted us at their place because we enjoyed each other enormously. And that's been the story of my life. I love women. I just think they're treasures. Each and every woman is a treasure. They're all different, which makes them even more interesting as treasures. Not interesting, but fascinating. And I am just that way. Never been monogamous, still am not. Although I must say I now have a regular girlfriend, and I haven't had another girlfriend for a good couple of years. Wow, at least a year. Well, that's for me. I'm 81 years old. And I still have dreams of shipwrecks, and I wake up clutching the masts, and I'm still in good shape. Well, there's an art to telling a story. There's an art to painting a picture. There's an art to everything. Everything that you can get passionate about. And using words instead of paint, that's something that's just another medium for being an artist. But if you live long enough, you become a muse. And that's what I consider myself, a muse. And hopefully I'm amusing. But essentially I'm a muse. So you tap into yourself and you register all of those wonderful experiences you've had. And when you think about it, the greatest thing we can do for each other is share our lives, share our compassion, and share our joy, and share our wonder. Um, I, th- I think of Einstein and think, wow, what an incredible mind that was. But if you read Einstein, you read about him, you realize he was basically just an ordinary person. He admitted he was very bad at math, he couldn't add up anything. But what a brilliant mind. Because he was bad at math, did that detract from his extraordinary wisdom? And he was a muse. Anybody who tells a story is a muse. And we are all muses to one degree or another. It's just a matter of tapping into that great resource we have. And the wonderful thing about human beings is we have such extraordinary experiences, and all of them are automatically recorded in our head. So if you've got 6 people sitting around a campfire, that's 6 computers sitting around a campfire. Now, for the past half a century, we've been busy trying to develop computers that can do lots of things, and now there's AI on the scene. Well, guess what? There's no computer that has even got close to the resources of the human brain. And each and every one of us have this computer within us. So if there's 6 of us sitting around a campfire, or sitting around the dinner table, or ever sitting around, that's 6 computers interacting with each other. When you extrapolate that, that's an extraordinary amount of information exchanging at light speed. How amazing is that? It's very easy to be amused when you think of that. And the ability to tell a story is simply being amused. And this is an old skill. It goes back to hunting and gathering, and before that, people living in caves. The human being has still remained unchanged in many ways. Our spirit is still the same. Which prompts the question, where did we come from? I have no idea where we come from. I do know we didn't come from apes, we didn't come from anything else, we didn't come from another living creature. There is no missing link ever been found, and nor will it be found. Because we're unique on the planet. My belief is that we were actually put here by some other entity, some other force greater than us. Call it God if you will. God's a handy name because it encompasses something very, very big. A force that's bigger than us, bigger than our universe, which is only one universe in a billion universes. So there are a billion Earths out there somewhere. We don't know. When you look up at the sky, there is no end to it. So it's a concept that human beings have a lot of trouble recognizing, because we're used to everything having a beginning and a middle and an end. You look up at the heavens, and to comprehend that there is no end to where you're looking is something that we almost can't take in. But it's the truth. So I think our obligation to each other in this amazing tribe to which we all belong is to be kind to each other and to share what we have with each other. Unfortunately, a lot of that's being lost today. If you look at the events around the world, it's pretty depressing. We're busy killing each other. But then again, if you look back and through time, we have spent a lot of time killing each other. Which prompts another question. Overpopulation. I don't believe we're anywhere near overpopulated, but lots of people do. However, if you think back in time and you redo history and say, okay, we started propagating, and we didn't kill each other, that it was very bad to kill each other. Well, there are billions of people now on the earth. So if we didn't kill each other, on the planet today, there wouldn't be enough room to stand on it, let alone move around it. So that's another question, isn't it? Is killing each other part of our survival? I guess it is. But it's really, really dreadful to think about. Which leads me into the realm of our endless minds and what we can think of. I think of the mind, the mind that each and every one of us has. It's a bit like looking up at the sky and seeing no end to it. There's no end to our mind. We cannot comprehend its vastness and what we are capable of, and how extraordinary each and every one of us is. In my case, I like to tell stories, which makes me amuse, in the old-fashioned way of putting it. And the ability to muse in the way we used to do it has changed. Not been eradicated, but changed. Young people look at computers today and they throw their mind into that. Well, they are musing too, but they're just doing it a different way. They're typing and they're rattling off stuff in their computers, and but it's just a different medium that they're using. But they're still, at the end of that computer, there is another person that's just like them receiving that information. Or in the case of computers, there are tens of thousands or millions of people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people getting that message. So that's what makes things different today. We are still musing, but we have technology. And let's face it, in another 100 years, what will that technology look like then? Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine what it's going to look like then, but it'll be extraordinary. It'll be absolutely extraordinary. AI is the beginning of something new, but it's only the beginning of something new, and it's only something new. When computers first came out, everybody said that's going to be the end of conversation because we'll have computers. Well, it wasn't the end of conversation. In fact, it broadened conversation, it broadened the sharing of knowledge, it broadened a lot of things. Well, AI is going to do the same, and whatever comes after that will do the same. So it's onward progression. But what goes around comes around. I see they're now powering great big ocean liners with sails that are drawing power not from the wind, but from the sun. Again, sails are still there, only they're just different. That's my story. I'm Colin Dangaard. Thanks for listening.